We are back on MorningLine. Our guest with us this morning, News Channel 5 legal analyst Nick Leonardo. It's always good to have him on. We can take calls. We had a couple through the break that we lost. You're welcome to call back 737-7587, talking about some legal cases. Wanted to ask you again, and you've explained this to me before, and I know so much about the law thanks to this man right here. I've learned so much from him. But the bond issue. Now, the Caitlin Kaufman case, just a heartbreaking case. This St. Thomas nurse driving on I-440 to work a couple of years ago, shot and killed. They find her later. She made it to the shoulder but couldn't call 911, found her shot. Car shot 6 times, hitting the shoulder. 2 individuals were arrested a short time later, Devontae Hill and James Cowan. Both of them locked up, charged with first-degree murder. But that was 2 years ago, and neither one of them were ever given bond. I don't know if their attorneys ever asked for it. There was a hearing last week where Devontae Hill has asked for bond. The judge is expected to come back with a decision this week. I think the question is, how much will the bond will be? I don't think this judge has any right to deny him bond. The question is how much. She could make it so high that he has no chance of making it. But explain how bond works and why there is a bond. It's not punishment. What is it?
So the bond, everyone who is arrested in America is entitled to a bond. We're also entitled to a bond under our state constitution. And a bond, the matter of bond is not a privilege, but a constitutional right versus probation or something that is a privilege. And so unless it's a capital case, that is that the state is seeking the death penalty, the state's not seeking the death penalty, then the defendant is entitled to a bond. And I believe this is in Judge Angelita Dalton's court. And I think they had that hearing last week, and she took the matter under advisement, which means she's going to think about it and issue a written order. And of course, that bond could be based upon factors. There's a list of factors that the court has to consider about to look at when it comes to setting a reasonable bond. But again, at the end of the day, bond is not to be punitive. Bond is there to assure someone's appearance on these charges, okay? Right. And so the judge can also institute whatever conditions that the judge deems appropriate on a bond. And a lot of times, I think in America, we're moving away from so much money being associated with a bond to the conditions. And personally, I think the conditions, whether it be every day you've got to report to the sheriff's department, or you have to be on electronic monitoring, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes I think that's more important than just having that person make a bond. But in a case like this where the stakes are so high, there's a real incentive for anybody charged with a crime like that to take off, okay? Because if they catch you, it's just an extra year, even if you're convicted for escape. And so if grandmama's house is up, or somebody's money is up, or the bonding company who's getting ready to have to forfeit a couple $100,000, everybody's looking for you, okay? Right. So he's entitled to a bond, and of course the question is how much is that bond going to be? And if the bond is $5 million, I mean, you might as well not even have a bond versus it being a $50,000 bond. But one thing we do see, and this is real, and it's important to point out, if these were 2 people that just shot each other somewhere else, and there's no media involvement, you're going to see a different bond than when you have all this media involvement in a situation. It shouldn't be that way, but it's just I think that's the nature of what we see.
I think you're right. Media coverage or publicity can influence decisions. But I mean, still though, on a first-degree murder charge of this nature, it is just so horrendous, whether there's media or not. I mean, a bond, let's face it, do you agree with me? This judge has no choice. She has to set a bond. If she doesn't, she's wrong. Well, she has to set a bond. There hadn't been one because maybe it hadn't been set originally and the attorneys did not ask for one. The question is, she's probably deciding on how much that bond will be. And you're right, his attorneys did say, we've got where he would stay. He could do ankle bracelet monitoring. You could, keep in mind, again, horrendous. They say there's evidence against him, but he's innocent until proven guilty, right?
Well, this presumption travels with him throughout the process, or it's supposed to.
But on a first-degree murder charge, whether there's publicity or not, what's a typical bond?
Depending on the facts, I don't know the facts in that case. One of the factors the court has to consider is the likelihood of conviction, the defendant's past criminal history, whether the defendant has missed court appearances, ties to the community. But typically on something like this, it wouldn't be unheard of to see a $150,000 bond, maybe a $200,000, maybe a $100,000 bond. Probably not going to see much less than $100,000, but again, I don't know. I think there was 2 individuals that were involved in this, and so I'm not sure this individual's role. And has he missed court appearances in the past? So I'm not sure what proof the court has, but I do believe that we will see an order this week, as you say, from Judge Dalton as to what that bond amount is going to be. But there should be a bond, and the Tennessee law has a fast track option. If there's an issue about bond that's threatened in a trial court, such as criminal court, or you got a grievance with an issue of bond, you can fast track that to the Criminal Court of Appeals, and they'll take a real quick look at it.
Okay. And you said it's not supposed to be punitive. Jan Norman, the DA, was arguing that, he is a risk to public safety if he was to get out.
That's a factor to consider.
Right. I mean, I don't think if he were to get out, I mean, he may be looking, he may know the evidence against him is heavy, and he's looking at life in prison without parole. Would he skip town? This guy doesn't have resources. He's not going anywhere. He's not going to get away. But it's like, my concern would be, does he commit another crime? If he was involved in this, who knows what he might do?
But again, the bond is there to ensure the appearance of the defendant in court. And so, 15, 20 years ago, we saw everybody, being drug tested on bond. If they were, a little bit, even if they weren't late to court, they came to court looking stupefied or something. I've heard that term used by district attorneys. The judge, we need to drug test them. Well, hold on. The fact whether or not they're doing drugs or not has nothing to do with whether or not they're going to show up for court. They're here.
Right.
Okay, they might be asleep in the front row, but they were timely here. Having the abilities or protecting the public, or if there's a threat to the public, that's something for the court to consider, and considering the amount as well as the conditions. But a threat, this could be an aberration for this individual. I don't know if he has a past criminal history or things of that nature.
It's interesting, by the way, only one defendant has asked for the bond hearing. The other one, James Cowan, is not. He's just, Well, you imagine these two will testify against each other? I know we can't get into all the details, and we don't know a lot of it because much of it's sealed. But I mean, the idea is they both were in the vehicle, and the thinking is that Devonta Hill is the one who pulled the trigger. We still don't know for sure what the motive is, but one of the witnesses who helped lead to their arrest said he understood it was some type of road rage thing, whatever that is.
Well, and a lot of times when you're charged with a crime like that, I'll tell people, you need to spend money on a lawyer, not on bond, because even if it results, you're just kind of wasting money sometimes on bond if you think if the evidence is so overwhelming. Okay, you get someone out of jail for 18 months and they go back and they just paid $25,000. They're not going to get back to get out of jail, and maybe that could be better spent on experts or maybe potentially legal fees.
And keep in mind, I'm glad you mentioned that, just for folks to understand bond and the way it works. If they set a $250,000 bond, okay, they could go to a bonding company, because I guarantee you he doesn't have $250,000, but say, would you post my bond? The bonding company says, yes, we'll do it, but you have to give us 10%, 25%. Right. By the way, 10% is negotiable. These days, I've heard bonding companies sometimes are so desperate for business, if they think it's a good risk, they'll say, we'll get you out for 5%.
Well, that's exactly right. And so there is some undercutting of these bonding companies. It's very competitive. We saw that during COVID when they were kind of not wanting to arrest people, sort of turning them away.
Well, they're hurting now because there's so much of the, what is it called? They're not setting bond or needing bond as much. They're negotiating. They're putting people out for different reasons
and
now.
Pretrial release.
That's it.
Pretrial release. But and so the bonding company, typically they can't charge any more than that 10% premium. But instead of, in that case, it would be $25,000. But if you got a bonding company that says, hey, I'll take your watch and I'll take $5,000, they're still on the hook for the full $250 if the person absconds. Right, but they're willing to take whatever they can take.
Yeah, and that's how bonding companies make money, is that, when the person finally does turn himself in, the trial happens, they get their $250,000 back, but they get to keep that $25,000 that the person's family paid them in return for having posted the bond.
And they're not allowed to, the one difference is that if it's over $25,000, the entire amount of the bond, so a $2,500 would be 10%. If it's over $25,000, our local rules of bonding companies here in Davidson County do not allow for a bonding company to make a credit bond, which means you can't take payments when it's that high. So you can't agree to do the 10% and I'll take payments. That's called a credit bond.
There has to be that $25,000, meaning they have to have a note on a house or family. Apparently, Hill's father said that they thought they could pull together resources to maybe post a $100,000 bond.
Well, and that's just the first step. If the bond is over $75,000, we don't know what the judge is going to do in this case, but there's going to be a source hearing. So just because an order comes out setting
they have to know where the money came from?
Got to know where the money came from. So
a drug dealer could not.
That's what they were trying to guard against, was people that are involved in crimes like drugs, they have a lot of cash, it's nothing for them to come up with $10,000 or so on a serious bond. So if $75,000 or over, then there'll have to be a subsequent source hearing for the court to determine if those sources are from ill-gotten gains. And 9 times out of 10, you can just take the DA into the back room and say, here's my checking account, this is my sister's checking account, here's mama's retirement check, this is where the money's coming from.
It's interesting. I had a bonding company contact me on my Facebook page, asking me if I would post something about one of their individuals they posted bond for who absconded. I think it was a $50,000 bond, and that meant the guy paid them maybe $5,000, and then they had to post the 50, and they think he's in Mexico and gone. If that happens and he never shows up, that bonding company is out that 50 grand. And that's how Dog the Bounty Hunter makes his money, isn't it?
Well, that's how he makes his money. But listen, these bonding companies are crafty. They got people on the streets that can find. They have snitch fees. They'll pay people $500 just to tell them where somebody is. But listen, they on maybe not the $50,000 bond, but if it's a $250,000 bond, they're chartering planes. They're people that are armed going into Mexico. I mean, they're going to stop at nothing to get that person back because it's a lot of money.
Yeah, and they don't get it back if that person doesn't show.
That's exactly right.
What if a person dies and is not incarcerated?
Well, then that happens too, and then you'd have to show that it was abated by death. But the question is, have you already paid in your final forfeit? Okay,
Yeah.
and then if so, you're asking the court for a refund. And I would think that would be discretionary. But let's say that there's a period of time before you have to pay that money.
Right.
Okay, and a lot of times these bonding companies on these forfeit dockets, they've already had 45 days or 60 or 90, 120, and they come in, judge, we just lost him barely. We saw him here. We had our hands on him. Judge, give us 30 more days. And if the person was dead and you could prove that that it was abated by death, then they wouldn't have to pay that. But if they've already paid in that final forfeit and that person dies, I think it's up to the court.
Yep, interesting. Let's take a call from Brian before we take our next break. Brian, good morning. Hi, Brian.
Oh, good morning, guys.
Good morning.
I haven't heard y'all mention in 2 days we have an execution scheduled. Do you think they're going to go through with it? Do you think the governor's going to go through with this execution, and another question is, are you going to be up the reporter that's going to be up there witnessing it? And then I'll sit back and listen.
Thank you for your call. That's right. It's going to be the first execution in Tennessee in just about 2 years. Everything was put on hold because of COVID, and also still questions about the drug cocktail they inject and the like. I think it's going to happen Thursday. I think the Tennessee Supreme Court just denied, and I forget his name. Maybe you guys can check again. I forget the individual's name. They denied his appeal, so now it's in the hands of the governor.
He's on death watch.
He's on death watch. He was moved last night. He was convicted of murdering his estranged wife and her 2 children.
In 1822. I mean, that's part of the problem. How many years ago was that? 4 years ago?
Almost that long. It's been a long time. And so I think he will be executed. Oscar Smith was it. Thank you, Rick. Oscar Smith. And yeah, he's been moved to death watch, and the execution is scheduled for 7 o'clock Thursday night. There are media representatives there. I will not be there. I have never witnessed an execution, and I've told our management staff, they usually ask when you have an opportunity to do it if there are volunteers that would like to. We've had several reporters, and I've said, listen, if it's an assignment, and I think it's worth covering, and it's definitely newsworthy, but if you're asking for volunteers, I'm not volunteering. I have no desire to see that. But if you're saying, Nick, we need you to cover it, that you're the best man for the job, and go, I would absolutely do it as part of the job. It's not like I wouldn't cover it, but I just don't really want to witness an execution. Have you ever witnessed one?
No, but I mean, why? I mean, that's a macabre part of the news story. I'll be honest with you.
Oh yeah, I think part of it is they want witnesses there to observe for a variety of reasons, not just did something go wrong? Or was there anything at the last moment that he said that maybe has some bearing on the case? Or, there's family members perhaps there. I mean, it is definitely newsworthy. It's not newsworthy, you're right, it's macabre if you're just there and everything goes, and just to describe how someone dies, which I have no desire to see. But it is newsworthy to be there. And there's media representatives there along with law enforcement, family members if they choose to on both sides, I guess clergy.
Yeah, and the victim's family, obviously they could be there, defense attorneys, clergy, but I mean, part of the problem is that let's look at the fiscal note. I think it's newsworthy, but it's just not sexy, and it's evergreen. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, think about the victim's family. If you look at when we did the Holly Bobo case, they did not get the death penalty, so they're done. We're not going to hear from them. The victim's family's not going to see them on TV, and we're not going to spend millions of dollars as taxpayers to execute somebody that you and I might not even be around to see executed. I think that it's just a whole lot cheaper on the fiscal note, and I guess that's kind of what gets to me about it is. And it takes forever. I mean, think about that. I mean, one of these people, the mother of this child, is already deceased. She's not even going to be around to witness the justice that comes along with that, the closure, if you will.
I think that's one reason why oftentimes the DA will consult, and now Glenn Funk doesn't seek the death penalty in Davidson County, but other counties do, where DAs have no problem with the death penalty, but they consult, and there are oftentimes family members who say, you know, send him away to prison for the rest of his life, Zach Adams. And one reason I believe in the Holly Bobo case, they could have pursued death penalty, and they got a deal to life in prison without parole, is because of the constant appeals and having to relive that horrible thing that happened to their daughter. And I totally understand that. And sometimes the family will say, I don't want the death penalty. If they said, what happened tomorrow? Yeah, I'll do it. But most of them realize that's months and years of painful rehashing. And remember Paul Reed? Scumbag, you know, mass murderer in this town, and he played games, and he said, yeah, I don't want to appeal anymore, I want to be executed. He got all the way to death row. I think he had his last meal. They're going to walk him in there, but the appeals were still pending out there, and he said, no, I want to reactivate my appeals. Back. Meanwhile, all the family had gathered for this again. They had to go through all of that. He ultimately died of heart disease while waiting for execution.
Well, and it gives a new definition to the term due process. And obviously so. I mean, there's nothing in the law that is irreversible other than the death penalty and the termination of parental rights. Okay? Yeah. Both of those are a 10. You can't go back on it. So that's why the due process is at such a high level. You want to make sure that you get it. You get it right. No doubt that the framers of the Constitution, when they drafted it, intended for there to be the death penalty, but there's no way that they could see that it could take 40 years to do this and millions and millions and millions of dollars, and rightfully so. I mean, if we're going to institute the death penalty, then we have to spend that money to make sure that we certainly have a guilty individual.
Yeah, the truth is the vast, vast majority of those on death row are guilty and did it. But even executing one innocent man, I mean, you can't take it back. And that's why you have to make sure these appeals are heard to a degree, but it is out of control. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, more of your calls, more of our conversation with legal analyst Nick Leonardo right after this.